Hey guys, coming to you from the beautiful port of Everett, Washington. Sorry I don't have a camera guy available today to hold this, but you'll have to suffice with me. But this week, on Monday, we spoke about storms and weathering storms. We talked about limbs being broken, and when the storm comes, if it's a dead limb, it's going to probably knock the dead limb off, right? And we talked about trimming back limbs metaphorically in our life, like bad relationships. There are toxic relationships that you have to get rid of. There are toxic attitudes that you have to get rid of. If all you ever say every time you open your mouth is the words like can't, won't, never gonna happen, that's impossible, if those are the kind of words that you speak all the time, you got to prune back your attitude and your mindset. See, high achievers, well, they use different words. I can, I will, it's possible. These are terms that you learn to use, that mentors teach you how to go ahead and do that by using positive affirmation, positive thoughts, believing it in our hearts, speaking it out there. And so when you speak and think negative, well, it's real simple. You're going to have a negative reaction in life. And so we got to prune back all that negativity. We got to prune back the toxic relationships, prune back our actions that are toxic. We find a lot of people that I've met over the years run into a lot of problems because of their own toxicity, meaning it's not even people around them, it's them. It's ourselves. Most of the trouble I've ever put myself in, and I say that, I put myself in, the majority of it is my fault. You know, I've been in prison, folks, for crimes that I've committed, and I've been in prison for crimes I never committed. But let me tell you something. At the end of the day, I still take responsibility. Had I been in a different location, I wouldn't have been in the place that I was at. You know, so when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, you have to be responsible for yourself. You have to be responsible for your actions and not blame other people. Because if all you ever do is blame people, well, I'm here to tell you, you're going to have plenty of people on this earth to blame for the rest of your life, and you're going to play that game. Now, we also talked about storms, right? We talked about how the storms come, and they come through pretty furious. Now, there's all kinds of storms out there in the physical world. I've lived in all over this world, but I've lived through tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes. When I was in Dallas, Texas, a little town called Plano, actually, outside of Dallas, we had tornadoes come through and touch the actual house, my house in Plano. Took part of the roof off. I was just a kid. And then, of course, you flip up and head up to like Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I lived. I remember the house next to us was totally gone, and the house on the other side, two down, was totally gone. And I remember seeing furniture and wood planks stuck in the side of the houses, including mine. And those tornadoes, you don't know where they're going to pop up. Like, they can't say, oh, there's going to be one right there, right now. That's not how it works. But here's what you can do. If you lived in Tulsa and Kansas and Texas like I did, you know the signs. So you look up at the skies and you see the clouds and you see the color of the clouds and you go, oh, wait a second. This is tornado weather, so I'm going to be on the lookout. And that's what happens in life. Same thing when it comes to hurricanes. You know, I lived from Florida all the way up to Maine. And when you take and look at the hurricane seasons, it's typically about the same time every year. The storms come up from Florida down there and head up the coast and tear everything in its path away, right? But the hurricane's a little different. Let's say the average hurricane I've been in is probably sitting in somewhere around 170, 150 miles an hour, somewhere in that place, of the wind, which is brutal. I mean, it just devastates towns. But here's what's interesting. The storm comes through as a hurricane, rushes, destroys everything, and then all of a sudden it's like the background behind me. It's beautiful. It's calm. And it's interesting because before the hurricane gets there, it's just like that also. It's calm. Then the hurricane hits and it's raging. And then all of a sudden, the center of the storm comes to land. And you're like, whoa, the storm's over. No, it's not over. It's just the eye of the hurricane. And then after that eye passes you, the rest of the hurricane or the back of the hurricane comes and takes down the rest of your city and town. And so it's different storms, earthquakes. I've been in earthquakes in California, where you're sitting there and literally freeways up in San Francisco collapsed. So there's some pretty bad things that happen with storms. Okay, now we're talking metaphorically, but we got to look at the physical and understand the physical is relating to us the spiritual. So physically we're talking about storms, but spiritually is what we're wanting to focus on. So we're talking about spiritual storms and physical storms that are spiritually related, meaning divorces, that's a storm. Children getting arrested or being drug addicts or getting arrested or stealing or fighting, all the things that come along with raising children. Maybe it's a job storm and you're in a situation where you're being abused at the office or you're being harassed physically, sexually, mentally, or whatever the situation is. There is a storm there. And the list goes on and on. So we're talking about those kind of storms. Now, every storm is never going to be the same. You could have 2 divorces in your life, and I assure you that both divorces are going to be different. Now, sometimes there are traits that are the same, but each storm is different. And how do you overcome those storms? And that's a good question. Well, you need mentors. You've always heard me talk about that. You're going to hear me talk about it for the rest of my life. And why is that? Well, because at a very young age, I was successful, extremely successful, financially, television, the whole gamut. One of the youngest guys to be a VP of a billion-dollar company. Again, how did I get to those positions? I had mentors, people who were holding my hand, walking me through the process, telling me how to do it, because they'd been there and walked that path before. So for them, it's no biggie. Well, see, storm is the same way. One of the men that I mentor, we were discussing this actually yesterday. And the funny part was he just went through a divorce and he was asking me, how did I get through that divorce I went through so easily? And I kind of laughed because the truth is, that was one of the most brutal things I've ever gone through was that divorce. But I went through it a lot more gracefully, if you will, than he did. And he asked me, how did I do it? And I said, well, I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. It was because I had a husband and a wife who were very dear friends who mentored me through it because they both had been through it. And that's what you got to remember, is that the mentors can help you go through these storms. So they know as they look up in the sky what the sky is supposed to look like. When they look out at the sea, they see the sea and they can tell what's coming in the storm. And they can tell you what's going to happen, how long it's going to last, and what you should look out for. And so that's why it's so important, if you want to learn to weather storms, to be around people who also know how to weather those very same storms. And that's why it's important to get plugged into a church that has mentors that can help you walk you through that process. Okay. A lot of times people try to do it all on their own. And I've done it myself. I love messing around with cars. Rebuilding an engine, not my forte. But if I try to mess around with an engine, I think I'm going to do more damage than I would do good. Why? Because I'm not a mechanic. Okay. But you put me in the boardroom on Wall Street and tell me you need me to open up a division and run a $100 million annual budget and oversee the marketing and the sales and the training and all the things that go with it. That's easy. I can do that with my eyes closed. Why? Well, I've been doing it for years. So you got to understand the process. If you know what you're doing and you've been driving a boat, well, then driving a boat on the Sound is no biggie. And if you've been driving a boat on the Sound for the last 20 years, when the storms come, you know it because you can see and feel it in your actual DNA. And it's the same thing in life. You got to remember that. So let's first figure out who your mentors are. Where are your mentors? And how are you going to get them? And TCI is here to help you in that respect. We have mentors throughout the U.S. in different states and in a few countries, actually, that are available for you. Mentors in marriage counseling, mentors in business, mentors in all kinds of areas. But what's interesting is that when you take and you look at the mentors out there and what they're going to do for you, well, here's the good news, okay? A mentor is going to help you see the storm before it comes. They're going to help navigate the storm, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to help you get through the devastation of the storm. And those 3 steps are very critical. So the first step is they need to help you identify the storm. What is a storm? What does it look like? Number 2, how to get through the storm. Number 3, how to rebuild after the storm. These 3 steps are crucial. And so it's very important that you go ahead and find your mentors, and you find them by trial and error. There's many people who were successful that I just didn't like. And to be honest with you, they didn't like me. But I found the ones that I did like, and they liked me. So it's about trial and error. It's about just trying to find that person to help you. You know, if you're single, well, you want to find a woman to show you how to become married. If you're married and you want to stay married, find a successful husband and wife who have been married for 50 years and ask them how they did it. So the process is pretty simple, but yet very difficult and very hard to go ahead and do sometimes on your own. But when you have people with you as a team, well, things go so much easier as a team. See, the word team, when you look at it, how do you spell it? T-E-A-M, team. It means together, everyone achieves more. Now listen to me. I know that sounds corny, and I know you say, oh, well, I've read that in about 16,000 different motivational books. Well, maybe you should apply it. I've heard a lot of people tell me that in the years. They've come into my house, and I got a library, and I got over 1,000 books just sitting on this one shelf. And they're like, oh, yeah, I've read that. Oh, yeah, I've read that. But then like a day later, they're asking me, hey, how do I become rich? And I'm like, well, you do this. And I grab one of those books, and I'll say, you need to start reading this. Oh, I've done that. Oh, so you have read it. Or you did listen to the seminar. Or you did attend that college and take that class. Well, then you need to apply it. You see, just hearing how to become successful doesn't make you successful. You have to take the knowledge that someone inputs in you, and you have to apply it to the street, to the boots, to the ground. You have to literally take and get on that boat, metaphorically, and get in there and start driving the sound. And you have to do that. And then you got to learn how to do it when the storms are coming, because you're young and you don't know when the storms are coming. And then you go, oh my gosh, the storm is here. How did I not see it? And that's when things can get dicey. But again, a good mentor can show you where to find those coves to park your boat, to weather the storms. So let's go ahead and try to focus now. We've learned about how we have to trim off the dead limbs, but let's focus on those 3 categories: identifying the storms, weathering the storms, and rebuilding after the storms. But let's rebuild stronger and better than ever, because at the end of the day, here's the cool thing, okay? You're always going to have storms. They're never going to not happen. I remember one of the first companies I ever opened, I think we only did like 150 or 160,000 the first year. And it was actually one of the worst years of my life. Then I flashed forward and we're in Wall Street, and I got 100 million a year going through the company that I'm running, right? And it was still not as hard as that first year. Now, how's that possible? $100 million is so much easier to run than 150,000? That don't make sense, does it? Well, actually it does. And here's how it makes sense. Because see, I had mentors that taught me back when I was only making 150, and it was stressful and it was chaotic, and it was like, oh my God, how do I do this? Well, it was new to me. I never had run a company before. I had been trained on them my whole life. See, when most kids went to your summer school break, and I'm 46 years old, keep in mind, so go back to when I was a kid. But when I was a kid, you know, summertime, you get a couple months off. And most kids, you get to go to Disneyland, or you got to go to some camping trip with your grandma or your grandpa, or you went to Uncle Bob's house or whatever, right? Well, you know what I did for my summer vacations? What I did for my summer vacations was I ended up going to boardrooms. My father, my birth father, he was a very powerful man. And I spent my summers in boardrooms. So when kids would get back from school and they'd be like, the teacher's like, so what'd you do, Johnny? And he'd be like, oh, I went to Disneyland. And they'd get, what'd you do, Jonathan? Well, I was in the Kodak merger when they acquired Kiss Photo, and it was a hostile takeover. I learned to understand, leveraged buyouts. They're like, what? You're 8 years old. So when I was a kid, most kids are out playing in the sun. I'm in a boardroom learning how that works. My father ran 3 churches in America that were at the time the top 10 largest churches in America. And you think a church is a very peaceful organization, but the truth be told, the most ruthless people I've ever met in my life came from the church. Called themselves a spiritually based, a Christian or a person who believes in God, and I love everybody. Yet they were the most vile and mean and nastiest people. So being raised in that environment, and the television ministries and all the ministries in the America and overseas that I had the pleasure of working with, unfortunately, they showed me at a young age how to do these things in a good way and in a bad way. I was able to see the ministers who took a church up to 20,000 people and then destroyed it. I was able to watch companies who were productive and go bankrupt. And it doesn't matter if you're a celebrity, you're an ex-NFL football player like my dad's partner, or an ex-NBA basketball player like another one of my dad's partners. None of that mattered. It really didn't. But the principles of being successful, be it in the church or the business, were all the same. And those men all had one thing in common, and those women all had one thing in common. They had mentors, and they had a plan. So let's look at our plan this week. Number one, we're going to do what? Identify the storms. How do we do that? We need to be paying attention to what storms are coming. What does it look like every time you find yourself in a bad storm? Well, you need to take and journal down. I journal all the time. I will write ideas down. I will write my feelings down when it comes to a bad week. If something happens and I've lost a lot of money, or I've lost a relationship, or something travesty occurred that was just horrible, that's okay. I make sure I write it all down, so that as I go and look back on it, I can try to identify key factors that'll help me or enable me to successfully overcome the next storm a little easier. See, that's what happens. It's not that the storms get easy. The storms don't get easier. They actually get harder. But you either get stronger or weaker. And well, the weak, you get crushed. And the guys and gals who get strong, well, guess what? You survive. So what do you want to be? Do you want the storm to crush you? Or do you want to go ahead and not only survive, but thrive, grow, take off, accelerate, be out there on your speedboat, right? Be out wherever it is, mastering whatever activity it is you want to do. If it's captaining a boat, if it's climbing Everest, if it's taking over the boardroom, if it's starting a small country church or building a mega church, it doesn't matter. The process is really simple, and the process for all of them are similarly close and the same. Those key components are important. I love you guys. The message is short. Let's identify our storms. Let's go ahead and figure out how to weather through them. And then let's go ahead and rebuild bigger and better after each storm. I love you guys. God loves you. TCI loves you. As we come to you from the port of Everett, Washington, do me a favor. You know the drill. Live positive.